the channel. My name is Adam Smith, and inside this brand new showcase, we're kicking things off with a how to set up video for Dawn of Madness from Dimension Games. As part of the showcase, for those that haven't checked out the game unboxing video I released prior, I'll put a link to it in the top right hand corner. It's a great video to show you all the components that came inside of the core box for Dawn of Madness, as well as the miniature box that came along with it. In this video, the purpose is to help you get the game off the shelf and to the table, showing you all the steps necessary to get ready to play Dawn of Madness. And stay tuned to the channel, and if you haven't already, subscribe as you'll be notified when gameplay releases in the near future. Without further ado, let's dive into what Dawn of Madness is all about for those that are unfamiliar with it. Dawn of Madness is a story-driven cooperative game of survival horror for 1 to 4 players. It's set in the exact same universe as the breakout hit board game Deep Madness, which I also covered on the channel. If you want to find a showcase for that, I definitely have it. You can search for it on the channel. Dawn of Madness is a completely standalone experience. It's unique, and it's going to be a terrifying gaming experience for you to enjoy. During the game, players are going to assume the role of wanderers trapped in a feverish hellscape surrounded by the distorted echoes of their own history. And as one of these wanderers, you must seek to discover what led you to this horrific world, struggling to survive as you and your fellow players' stories unfold across multiple chapters in an ongoing campaign. Now, inside the rulebook, Dawn of Madness has a standard mode of play. It also allows for short and long game lengths, and also allows you to add in some things like the Devour optional rule to basically spice things up even further. But there has been a newly released story mode, which is official. You can actually find this documentation right on the Kickstarter update specific to the story mode. I believe it is update 97. There is a PDF inside of Update 97 you can download in order to keep it for yourself, and it's worth mentioning being that this is an official mode of play. They actually recommend you use it for your first few games. And even after those first few games of story mode, you can come back to the experience of enjoying story mode again and again if you want to experience more of the story without worrying as much about something eating you outside of that story. Of course, this is going to increase the risk of getting eaten inside of the story, but in other words, you have to fret a little less about survival out there in the other world. You can just enjoy your nightmarish time in this space. So you have multiple options to come at this game from, and I think the story mode is a great onboarding experience. So we're going to focus on that in this showcase. And the story mode is very easy to implement. All you got to do is take the story mode PDF from Update 97, and during the event phase, as opposed to those in the storybooks, you're going to read the event entries in that PDF. There's also an additional tweak to simplify the monster spawning if you choose to use it. It's called Chaos Rifts, and we're going to use it inside of this video series to show you how it works. Now, for those curious as to what the advantage is for story mode versus just reading the rulebook and diving in full-fledged play, when you're a brand new player, it's going to decrease the complexity, decrease the upkeep, decrease the difficulty, and decrease the game length. So it's going to give you the advantage of learning the game without going to the deep end of the pool for the very first time. So what is the overall objective of Dawn of Madness? Is to forge a unique, frightening story through the game's encounters while also fighting to defeat its imposing mini-boss, the Abomination. And if you succeed, you then proceed into one of your story's 4 endings to shape the conclusion. Setup is divided into 5 sections, and the first section is to prepare your wanderers. So we're going to choose our wanderers as step number 1. We have the 4 wanderers sitting here in front of us from the core box. When selecting your wanderers as a solo player, you're going to be controlling 2 wanderers. So from these 4, I'll be selecting 2 to use. I could use 3 or 4 if I wished as a solo player. If you're playing with 2 to 4 people around the game table, each individual will take 1 wanderer. For this journey into darkness, I've chosen Claude and Catherine. There will be 2 matching standees for each of the wanderers, and I'm going to be keeping them flat on the game table because they'll be easier for you guys to see. But when you're playing, you'll be using these as standees. There is a plastic base they'll be inserted into. And from the Otherworld box, which is the miniature box, I've also grabbed the 2 miniatures that represent each of the wanderers. You can choose to use the miniatures to represent them or the standees. In my case, I'll be using a mixture of both. Now, at this point in time, you might have a wanderer you've selected to use that already has legacy components that are tied to that character. In other words, they've been part of a journey in the past, and so they might have legacy cards for the Abomination or final legacy cards for themselves from previous games. So in that case, these would be placed by the dashboard. In this case, because we're starting off fresh, there is nothing on the legacy side of the equation. Now, as I alluded to before, depending on how many wanderers are in play at this point, in this case, it's 2 wanderers, then you're going to find the 2 Wanderer support deck. It's going to have 5 cards in this case. There is a deck for 3 Wanderers if you're controlling that. And of course, if you're controlling a full-fledged 4, then there will be no support deck whatsoever. We then take all these components and place them nearby. We got Catherine over here, Claude over here, and we have the support deck. I found a space center at the very bottom of the game board to place those. Moving on to step number 2, it's all about preparing the existence decks and the starting existence cards. So first off, the existence decks for both the Wanderers are easily found. If you look at pages 8 to 11, you'll notice there are 7 basic existence cards for each of the Wanderers, but there's also a bunch of locked existence cards. And you'll notice if you look closely at the artwork for the locked ones, there is chains going across the artwork. And in this case, there are no chains, which means these are the basic cards, and I've got 7 for each of my Wanderers. You want to make sure to leave any existence cards that are considered locked out of this equation when you're setting up for the very first time. The game will instruct you when you're able to make use of them in the future. Now, to determine which starting existence card you should have to start off the game, simply flip over your Wanderer dashboard. On the opposite side, you'll see starting existence, in this case, green thumb for Catherine. And on the other side for Claude, it states in his sights, which actually ends up being the 2 cards we're seeing right here on the top of the decks. Now, Wanderers can acquire their own existence cards during the game, but the only one currently usable from the start is going to be the ones on the back of those dashboards. So just these 2, one for each of the Wanderers. Simply place that starting card face up next to the dashboard, and for myself, I've just placed the rest of the cards face down underneath for the time being. Now on the opposite side of the dashboard, you might have noticed in the prior shot another starting component. This is called a starting domain. In this case here for Claude, it's a 44 Magnum. We're going to be looking at the domain deck in order to find this card, and that's also going to be placed next to this dashboard. So Claude has his starting existence card as well as his starting domain card face up. For Catherine, her starting domain, after taking a look myself, is the butcher knife, which I've already grabbed here and placed nearby. The rest of the domain cards can all be shuffled together and placed near the game board. With Step 2's existence cards dealt with and Step 3's domain cards now dealt with, we move to Step 4, where we record the starting sequence values and prepare the starting domains. To do this, find the sequence pad, which is a pad of paper, and pull off 1 sheet per Wanderer. You're going to notice across the top 5 different color symbols, and if you take a look at the dashboard for your Wanderer, you'll notice some numbers in each of the colors around the center area. You're going to simply record those values in a row formation across your sheet, making sure, again, to tie the value to the color in the correct way. And as you go through the game, whether you take positive or negative hits to those values, you'll be making changes on this sheet all through gameplay. So at the very beginning of your experience, it'll just be the printed values on the dashboard, quite simplistic, but as you continue to play the same Wanderer through multiple plays, you could potentially have modifications from other components such as legacy cards that could actually change these values off the hop. And as you'd likely expect, all the Wanderers have different default sequence values to start things off. Next, we're going to prepare the starting domains. These 5 areas on the dashboard are known as domains. We have the sequence values in the middle, and we use these values to determine how many of what color dice we're going to be rolling to prepare the domains. So we're going to go ahead and roll all of these dice. As you can see, 3 purple, 2 red, 2 green, 2 yellow, and 1 blue. Once we roll these dice, we'll be placing sequence markers in the dashboard domain areas matching the die roll results. Let's go ahead and make the roll and see how we do. The dice themselves have the domain types right on them, and you're going to see them represented in the domain areas on the dashboard. So first off here we have eye, we have hand, we have sphere, and we have brain and skull. These all represent thematically different things. The sphere is related to the unknown, the skull, connection, the brain is thought, the eye, observation, and the hand, manipulation thematically. So we look at the domain type on the dice. In this case, we have the eye here, but has various colors. And then place the sequence markers in the domain area based on the type from the dice we roll. So we got 2 purple, a green, and a red, all going inside the eye domain. Now, the crowdfunding campaign as an add-on had enhanced sequence markers that look like this. I'll be using these ones going forward instead. Don't have to worry about the icons in the center of them. They simply just represent a default icon, which you can actually see right in the center here of the dashboard per the different colors. Just like that, we got the sequence markers in place in the domain areas, again, per the dice we rolled. And if I haven't touched on this already, the sphere, also known as the unknown, is a wild in the game. We'll talk more about this during gameplay. Now it's time to roll for Claude, and we're also going to be referencing his sequence pad in terms of his values to determine what dice he's rolling. And again, for the very first play, it's going to match what's here in the center. Let's go ahead and roll and see what we get. And as you can see with Claude, he got a bunch of sequence markers up here with the sphere. The rest of the sequence markers I placed inside of a game tray. That game tray is not part of the final version of this game in any way, shape, or form. It's simply my own way of keeping these things organized. We are now nearing the end of preparing the Wanderers, and one of the last steps is to now choose the central Wanderer. So from the Wanderers we've selected to play, one of them will be the central one. In this case, I've selected Catherine Little. With your central wanderer now chosen, you'll find the storybook that ties to that wanderer, and it's very easy to do because the name is right at the bottom of one of the storybooks. In this case, it's called Every Growing Thing. The final step of preparing the Wanderers is to go inside the storybook for the central one you just selected, and you're going to read that narrative at the very top. We'll certainly do this when we actually dive into gameplay in the future. You can pause the screen and read it if you wish, but I will be reading that out in a future video. But what you really want to focus on here is the special rules. And in this case, there's some highlighted. We have the infected Wanderers and the uninfected Wanderers, and then below the Butcher tokens, and finally ending D. So reading all these will give you a great idea to additional steps you might need or additional components in terms of the setup. In the next video, part number 1, we'll go through the narrative at the very top of that page, as well as all the description of each of these special rules. But for now, just grabbing the components that we need to set up. So I've got myself a deck here of infected cards and also some Butcher tokens up here. Now, something I highly recommend that you do the very first time you punch through all the tokens in the game is sort them all out. Take a look at pages 8 through 11, and then find all the standees and all the scenario-based tokens and all of the other tokens and cardboard that you need, and put them into one baggie for that particular wanderer. So that way, when you select that wanderer as your central wanderer, you'll have everything you need in one spot, and you can even keep it off to the side until you're actually called upon to bring certain things into play. So for those curious, that baggie in the top left-hand corner, looking at page 8 of the rulebook, you'll find all of the cardboard tokens that I've got inside of that baggie. So things like the boss standees, I've got the malformation standees in there. I've got human planter tokens. I've got butcher tokens. Of course, I took those out moments ago. Plant tokens, little Catherine token, the 3 square or rectangle tokens at the bottom of the page. And of course, the white standees that match Catherine are actually out of that bag currently on her dashboard. But everything else is inside that bag from page number 8, so it's just a good way to keep all of those Wanderer specific components in one spot, and then you can place them inside of her specific box when you're all done with this one. The first section, preparing the Wanderers, is now complete. We can move on to preparing the game board. And the very first step we need to do is find the 16 World Shard cards, which are found inside of Catherine's Central Wanderer box. And we've got ourselves the 16 cards right here. We're going to shuffle them up, and I'm going to place them going left to right all the way through all the 16 different location areas on the game board. When the World Shard cards are placed out, ensure that they're all on their Wanderer side. You'll know this because of the encounter title as well as the encounter entry on the bottom. Step 2 is to place 10 game round trackers face up on the round track at the bottom of the board in order. Step 3 has you placing an ending score tracker on each finale 0 space along the ending score track. You'll find these on the right hand side of the game board. These will go from A, B, C down to D. Step 4 is to roll the 16-sided Otherworld die and place your figure on the matching world shard. So we have to do this for each of our Wanderers. We'll go ahead and do it. If we roll a matching result to another Wanderer, we have to re-roll once again. So the first one here will be for Catherine, and she got herself a 2. So Catherine is way up there in the top right-hand corner in the basement. I placed her standee as well as her figure there. Now, typically you'd pick one or the other, but just for clarity's sakes, you can see things more easily. The miniatures might blend in from distance. I'm placing the standee there as well. Let's go ahead and roll the die once again, this time for Claude. Again, if we roll the same result, we have to re-roll. Let's see what we get. We got ourselves a 1, and Claude's going to be starting his adventure in the homestead. Here's a closer look at the world shard where Catherine is, and the homestead where Claude is. The fifth and final step of preparing the game board is to place your mental capacity tracker for both of your wanderers based on their maximum mental capacity value you can see down here. So we have an 8 for Catherine, so her gray token on her dashboard is going in the 8th position on the mental capacity track, which is on the left-hand side of the game board. And then for Claude, his is a 6. That completes the section revolving around the game board. We now move into the third section to prepare the encounter cards and the Coda cards. Start this section by taking out the Central Wanderer's encounter cards and separating them in 2 face-up decks beside the game board, one of them with spawning conditions on their backs and one without them. And then during each game's round in the event phase, players must check if an encounter card spawning condition has been met, the one that's face up there on the right. The final step of this section is to take out all the Central Wanderer's Coda cards and place them into a face-up deck beside the game board, as you can see here. Now, it's worth mentioning that the game effects are going to tell you when specific cards are coming out during gameplay, so keeping these in an alphabetical order by their title is definitely recommended. I highly recommend you do not shuffle that deck at the very top of this screen, as finding cards will become that much harder during gameplay. We now move to section number 4, which is all about preparing the Abomination. There's a number of Abominations to choose from, and the rulebook depicts choosing Frenzy as part of potentially your very first run at the game. So I've done just that. We've got the card for Frenzy, the Abomination, right here, and the next step is to roll the Otherworld die. Now, when I roll the Otherworld die to determine where this Abomination is going to go, if it happens to land on a space where a Wanderer is, we just re-roll the die. So let's go ahead and roll and see where it's going to land. Frenzy is heading to 16. That's going to place Frenzy on the world chart known as the chair, which is actually up there close with where Catherine is. Next, we're going to go ahead and grab the mental capacity tracker for the Abomination, and we can see the mental capacity of the Abomination based on the card here is a 9. We'll place that on the track. The Abomination's mental capacity is higher than both of my Wanderers, placing it near the top of this mental capacity track. Next step for the Abomination is to find the 10 confrontation cards that relate to that Abomination, give them a shuffle, and draw one face up, placing it next to the dashboard, and then keep the rest of the deck nearby. The next step here is an important one, but if you're playing your very first game, you can skip right past it, but I'll still mention what it does. If the chosen Abomination's family lineage envelope has at least one active lineage token stored in it, place it beside the game board with the lineage token or tokens on its matching section or sections. And again, you're ignoring this. You don't have to do this step whatsoever if it's your very first game, but it is worth mentioning that this is how there is subsequent tie-ins to multiple plays in this game. Every Abomination belongs to a family with 4 distinct Abominations. Example is Rage family. We have that here with Frenzy. Frenzy, as you can see around the dashboard there, is attached to the Rage family, and each family shares a lineage envelope listing the punishments that will afflict the Wanderers if they fail to kill a family member in a previous game. So indeed, pretty nasty stuff. Now again, we get to skip past this in our very first game, going to the final step of the Abomination setup, and this is only if we choose to use the Devour optional rule. Now I'm not going to use this. You'll find this at the bottom of page 14, the bottom left-hand corner, if you want to read it and add this into the fray. I probably recommend that you don't add this in the very first time you're playing, just so you have one less thing to have to track and deal with. But if you want to be brave and dive right into it, feel free to jump that one in. That's going to end off section number 4. We're now moving into section 5, the final one, which is preparing other decks and token pools. We'll start things off by preparing the Terror deck as well as the Malformations. Now I've kind of mixed these together here. So first off, I want to show you the specific cards for Catherine. Catherine has this green icon, and you'll see a very faint black symbol inside. It almost looks like roots or some kind of breakage of glass or something like that. But basically look inside the icon itself, and that will help you to determine if you have the right cards for this Central Wanderer. But inside the box, based on the Malformations of Catherine, you'll know exactly which icon you should be looking for elsewhere. And then these are the final boss ones. Again, they have the same icon symbol, just a different color. They're red. So you've got all these, just place them in a pile nearby. You'll use them as the game instructs you to. Now these ones over here have the same icon in green that match the exact same symbol that's inside of it, but these are terror cards. So that's how you know exactly which ones to grab. These are 3 specific terror cards for the Central Wanderer that you're playing. You're going to want to pull these 3 out because you're for sure going to have situations involving them, and then you're going to create a separate terror deck on the side that's more generic. As you just saw in the previous shot, we went ahead and got the 3 malformation cards for Catherine, and we looked at the icons in green, and we also got the 2 boss cards, and they all have the same icon. They're all related to Catherine as a central wanderer, so we placed those in a pile for reference later on. And then we went to the terror deck, and we went through a number of green icon terror cards, looking for the exact same icon we see on Catherine's malformation, for example, and we grabbed the 3 terror cards from there, which we know have to be inside this scenario. But there's a whole bunch of terror cards which are generic, and they look like this, and they do not have a green symbol anywhere on them. These ones are shuffled together into a deck and also placed nearby. Any other green icon terror cards that do not match your Central Wanderer's green icons, do not include them as part of setup. Put them back in the box. So I placed these 3 decks around the game board. Again, one of them is not really a deck, it's more for reference, just the malformations and the final boss ones there. I've got the ones that are specific terror cards for my Central Wanderer, 3 of them right there. And then on the far right, we've got a deck worth of terror cards all shuffled together. They're the generic ones. Now it's all about the condition cards. You'll see 4 decks here. We have the shuffled disoriented deck, the envenomed deck, the lightheaded deck, and the traumatized deck. Now, the traumatized deck has many different backs. Don't get confused by this. Shuffle them all together in a pile and place them in a single deck. I've gone ahead and placed a number of general tokens inside of game trays. Again, these game trays are not part of the crowdfunding campaign in any way, shape, or form, or any retail version of this game. As you can see here, we have blue and red consequence tokens right here. We have void tokens here. These ones, there's not as many of them. There are 4 trap tokens down below. We have these, which are known as existence tokens. These here are completed and exhausted tokens. And then over here, of course, we have the wound tokens of varying values. At this point, the game is completely set up, but there are 2 things I want to mention before we wrap up the video. The first one is, as part of the story mode PDF, you'll find the Chaos Rifts variant at the very back end of that PDF, and it tells us to place all domain rift tokens into an opaque container during game setup, or in this case, I placed them inside of this very thematic, evil-looking bag. For those unfamiliar with how this works, I'll quickly go over it. You ignore the standard rules when spawning a monster or refreshing its domain rifts. Instead, you randomly draw 3 domain rift tokens from this bag and place them onto the monster's card's 3 slots. You return a domain rift to this bag when discarding it from a monster's card. It's also very cool because this Chaos Rifts variant can be used when playing story mode or even in the standard game. And last but certainly not least, one of my favorite things to see inside of a board game is a quick reference guide that takes you through all the major actions, the major phases of play, as well as special effects you need to keep top of mind, mental capacity, existence, domain card limit, all these things right here at your fingertips for when you need a reminder as you go through gameplay. So keep this one close by, especially in your first few games where you're getting yourself used to how things flow, and then after a while you may not need this anymore. And that, my friends, wraps up the How to Set Up video for Dawn of Madness coming from Dimension Games. Very, very excited to dive into this with you guys and see whether I can pull off a victory or maybe a crushing defeat. We'll have to see what the game has in store for us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, definitely recommend you do. You'll be able to see a whole bunch of solo videos landing all the time, as well as the upcoming gameplay series for this showcase. And also, if you'd like to join in and discuss games like this and other solo games with solo gamers, we've got a Discord community where those conversations are happening all the time, as well as a Facebook group that you can join. The links to all those in the video description and pinned comment. We'd love to have you in either space. There is no strings attached on either of those. You can dive in and have conversations among a number of individuals in the hobby and be able to just have conversations about the games you love, the games you don't like, the reasoning for it, and just meet new friends that you can actually talk games with at all times. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.